And welcome everyone to God's Views on Political News. So glad to have you here today. This is kind of a solemn day for everybody where we're remembering 9/11. And also, before we get started on the show, I want to just everybody out there who is in the path of Hurricane Florence, please evacuate, as they're requesting that you do in some places, ordering you to evacuate. Please don't take chances with your life.
No, that would not be good. My son and daughter-in-law live well inland, actually, but they're calling for possible catastrophic amounts of rain and flooding and high winds, and so we're trying to talk them into coming over here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not a good thing.
Well, they say when that hurricane comes inland like that, it could sit there for like several days and it could bring about 3 feet of water.
Yeah, that's what they're talking about with this. That's why I was saying that the wind is one thing, it's the rain, and wow. So yeah, kind of an interesting thing to consider on a day like today.
Yeah, no kidding. And we were talking about this earlier that it just seems like we're getting more and more things sort of in biblical proportions of rain and hurricane and earthquakes that we've had here and Japan and Ecuador and all along the Ring of Fire and all that. I mean, it's just getting more and more prevalent.
Well, I think there's a reason for that. We might talk about that if you'd like.
Yes. It might come up, in this subject.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, well, going back to the September 11th thing, not only, what happened 17 years ago, but what happened in Benghazi. We also remember, there were people that were sacrificed on this date not too many years ago.
6 years ago. Yeah. 2012. It was. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, a lot of people for today, it's a very somber day. And I'm sad for what happened, of course, but I'm also sad that in America, we don't seem to teach about what happened in 9/11, why it happened, why it's so important. I know a lot of kids weren't even born during that time, but we're not allowed to show any clips from 9/11 on TV. And I think it's something that we should never forget. And we should be showing that. We should be showing that today, the clips of absolutely, what happened. And one of the things that I do remember, though, about that day, and I've talked about it with others, it was a day where we were Americans. It didn't matter what color skin we were. It didn't matter what gender we were. It just mattered that we were under attack and we knew that we were to stand together, and we did. And we're a long way away from that day.
Well, if I might say, it's because a lot of people were freaking out. They didn't know what was going to happen next. I'm thinking back to where I was and what I was doing, and, waking up and going down in the lobby of this hotel and seeing the pictures, and people were freaking out. They didn't know what was going on. And I just remember throughout the day hearing about, where's President Bush, because he was all over the place, as we found out later, and because people didn't know what was going on. And so when people are fearful and are uncertain on that kind of a level, it's amazing how quick they are to abandon the godless ways and want God to be on our side. So anyway, that was my thought.
Yeah, and it was a scary time, and everybody was like, like you said, where's President Bush? But at the same time, the racial divide, the divide that we see today just was not present. We didn't have that. We didn't have it as a high level even before 9/11. And we certainly on that day, we banded together.
Yeah, I think the focus that day and the days after that, the focus we had was a lot different than what we have today.
Yeah.
I don't know that the problems went away. Obviously they didn't.
No.
I think our focus was different that day, but might I say that, sometimes that's what it takes for God to get our attention.
But did God get our attention for one day, or for 1 week? It seems like we kind of quickly moved past that day.
Well, then that if that's the case, we didn't learn our lesson, did we?
No.
And if that's the case, then there's another September 11th in our future.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying that same scenario, that same uh, setting, but the same overwhelming sense of, oh my goodness, what's going on?
Yeah. I just noticed too that on that day after a day or two after that happened, I noticed the men in America, they became very like overly aggressive because I think they were wondering how do we fight this? How do we fight an enemy that has never come and attacked us on American soil? And I think the men didn't know what to do, and how to handle that. Nobody knew how to handle it.
Well, I mean, it was, I mean, in some ways, unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that if, one thing that we did learn and that I don't know for why we've kind of dismissed this now, but one thing we did learn is that, those who are strict adherents to Islam don't care about their own lives or the lives of anyone else. If they are strict adherents to Islam, they'll go to any lengths. And if you think about it, what happened that day, as far as I can remember in history, we hadn't seen anything like that since kamikaze pilots in World War II. And I remember my uncle who fought in the Pacific back in World War II, talking the very little he talked about those kinds of situations. I remember him talking about how do you fight people who, they're just ready to die. They're just prepared to die. He said we were all wanting to stay alive. Right. He said, but they were all wanting to kill themselves. He said, how do you fight against that? So I think in a way we were reminded that there is evil in this world that is more than willing to sacrifice their own lives to advance their cause. And unfortunately, I think we have forgotten that lesson and tried to put a smiley face on it. I don't know. It's just amazing to me. But anyhow, I wanted to say real quick, and there's a lady that's on here. She canceled an appointment.
Yes, I know.
To listen to you and me flap our gums for an hour. So.
And we love her for that. We really do. Now, Beth Holland said, everyone remembers the 9/11 attacks, but a good portion of the country seems to have no problem enabling and siding with the very ideology that did these evil acts and give them preference over Americans. For the life of me, I just don't get how any American can be so blind to this and be a leftist. Beth, part of that is, again, I think some of these people who are doing that don't remember it. The other people have their own agenda of being elitists and globalists and want to bring on the New World Order, and they don't care, if they're siding with the enemy.
Well, I think part of it too is the strong delusion that Paul talks about. Mm-hmm. Sent to those who don't want the truth and who look favorably upon unrighteousness. I don't doubt for a moment that is part of it. That God sends them that strong delusion. You want to embrace a lie, you shall have a lie. This is what you're going to have. That's how I see it anyway, because it does not make sense to me to embrace a mindset and an ideology who, if you get down to its purest form, wants everybody destroyed that doesn't agree with them. And it's just ironic that people in this society today come against people like you and me because they say we want to destroy them because they don't agree with us. It's amazing.
And yet we don't have a book written to tell us to do that. In that book, it tells them to do just that. And I think people, in America, it's been covered up with signs like coexist, and you're not allowed to speak out about the truth. And so by silence, you keep everything, the truth hidden. And so people even are even more deceived because the truth isn't allowed to be spoken.
Yeah. Well, I've said it often. I'll say it again. Osama bin Laden was a good Muslim.
Yeah.
He was a faithful Muslim.
Yeah.
He actually believed the Quran. He actually believed the hadiths, and he carried out what those things said.
No, Dawn said we didn't have such a racial divide before that day or after. The divide came from the last administration. Chessie said, I would hate to think what it would take for God to get our attention now. Yes, and I think Revelation has some guidelines in there. Jonathan said, I was with my supervisor watching it at the college union. My supervisor was not a believer, told his wife on the phone, this might be it. I told him it might be what? And yeah. Bethany said she's watching. Good morning, Beth, or good afternoon to you people on the East Coast there. Robin said 9/11 shocked me then, but nothing shocks me now. Keep your eyes on our Savior. You can't fight those people, Jen was saying. And that evil still exists, Darlene said. And I think not only, Darlene, does that evil exist, but it's multiplied. Don't you think, Bill, that it's even more?
It's propagated. I keep going back to this show after show after show, but the principle it's being demonstrated each and every day. It's the parable of the wheat and the tare. You have this other seed that it goes into the ground, and when it's first growing, you don't recognize it. If you don't know what you're looking for, it just kind of grows with the good seed. And nobody wants to pluck it up because they don't want to uproot the good with the bad. So you let it grow, but eventually it bears its fruit. And when it bears its fruit, then of course that means there's more seed contained in it, and it just propagates. And that's what's happening today. The fruit of this other seed is there for everybody to see. And it's, as you said, multiplied. It's, years ago, Beth and I, we planted some, I think they're called black-eyed Susans. I think that's right. Is that right?
Yeah, flowers? That's right.
All right. So I had this big old bed of black-eyed Susans, and I planted a few plants. Well, the long story made short is they propagated so that entire bed was just filled up in just a couple of seasons. It was amazing to watch how they spread. All right. Well, those are black-eyed Susans, and they're nice and they're pretty, and then, everybody likes those. What we're talking about is a poisonous seed. And it's propagating and it's multiplying. And how shall I say this and not be too offensive? They don't have to speak Arabic to be of that ilk. Mm-hmm. They don't have to wear the green scarves around their forehead, marching, in goose step in some parade in the Gaza Strip to be of that ilk. They live next door to us. They live in our communities. They're in our colleges. It is spreading in that way. Was that too politically incorrect?
No, but it's truthful. So, you have to say the truth. I think it's more imperative for us to be saying the truth these days and to watch this political correctness. That's what silenced us and probably gotten us a lot into the place that we are today. Now, Anne said, speaking of political correctness in the UK, Anne said, watching here in the UK, I was thinking if this can happen in America, what can happen here? And Anne, it's kind of like in America, we're sitting here watching what we think is happening in the UK, which is maybe not happening all at once, but it's sort of creeping into the UK and just continuing to fester and grow. And so what are your thoughts on that, Bill, about the UK, if you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, begging your pardon, Anne, kind of like here in the US, at times, in times past, presently you have government that is, seems to me, in kind of inviting it, mm-hmm. Kind of encouraging it. And anytime that it is encouraged, it's going to take advantage of those things. And I say this respectfully, but in the UK, it seems that it won't take a 9/11. The way things are right now, it won't take a 9/11 event. It's going to be that these people are just overrun, and they wake up one day and they say, what happened to my country? It's going to be over with, more or less. And I don't live in the UK, so, I don't know all the ins and outs, but just observing it from here, you look at the mayor of London, he's wanting to take knives away from people, but they're encouraging this influx of Islam, So I've seen pictures taken from the UK and other European countries where just thousands upon thousands of Muslims, in streets, in city streets, stopping traffic, for daily prayers and things like that.
Right.
And it, and I may be dead wrong here, and Ann can correct us if we're wrong, but it seems to me that there's nobody there or there's very few there. Let me rephrase that. Very few there that see this as a threat. And Ann, if I spoke out of turn, you can please correct me.
But also those people that what I've seen in the UK, and especially with Tommy Robinson, people like that, you're not allowed to speak out about it. If you have an opinion, you can't say anything. So,
Right. And that's what I mean by encouraging it, kind of inducing it to do. And so it may not take a 9/11 event. It might be that Britons wake up one day and they look around and realize, oh my goodness, our country's gone.
Right. It's almost like their 9/11 is occurring every day. Not that it's not continuing to happen here in certain aspects, but in just speaking of the UK, I think the 9/11 is happening every day. Now, Jonathan said, the Lord will get our attention soon. Hope we will listen then. Barbara said, we often do not know about who is in our midst amongst us, I guess. Bethany said that it's a frog, kind of broiling in the pot really slowly. It's like it starts to get boiling, and then it's too late, after a while. Right. Barbara said, yes, the truth is they do not have to be racial to believe it's okay. They never speak against it. We need to stand together and pray for our enemies, Jonathan said. And then Christy was talking about the same person, Tommy Robinson, that again, he was arrested for speaking out. And people think that, all across the world that they have freedom of speech, and they don't, and we're losing our freedoms here. And this is why we have to stand up for our rights. And Chesney thinks that in the UK, it's too late.
Well, I hope not. I really hope not. But until people stand up and not for political right, but for biblical right, this is the kind of danger we face. And you're right. Britain's a small country. It's easy to concentrate certain influences, forces, a mindset in such a small country. We're more spread out, but nevertheless, it's still kind of infiltrated. It's still kind of propagating here. And if we're not careful, we'll wake up one day. And we'll wonder, hey, what happened to my country? I mean, I already feel that way.
Yes. I wake up every day saying that. So, now Ann said, you're correct, Bill. The populace know what is happening. It's the government. And those of us that stand up are called extreme right bigots. Well, welcome to America, Ann, because we are too.
Yeah, welcome to my world, right?
Yeah. And then Linda said it's kind of odd in the USA. No one has mentioned there has been no major attacks lately, and are they laying in wait? And again, it's we've forgotten about 9/11. We've forgotten how horrific that day was until the anniversary comes up, and then we remember again how we all felt, what it looked like, and what that would be, how devastating it would be to have another attack like that, and probably this time it would be much more of a major attack than even 3,000 people, God forbid, lost their lives. How would it be? 6,000? Would it be 12,000?
Who knows? I mean, there have been other attacks. Obviously, we haven't had any attacks like that so many at one time lost their lives. But the attacks haven't stopped. I mean, there's, just in your neighborhood, what was it? Was it Redlands? Where was that at? Just a couple of years ago. But they went into a community center and shot up a bunch of people,
San Bernardino.
Okay. Yeah. I knew it was a San something, but I couldn't
San something. Yeah.
But there've been attacks. I mean, I'm looking out at some hills right now out my window, and just over one of those hills is where some of the people who attacked us on 9/11 trained, where they came into these small airports and they trained around in this area down in Florida as well. And in fact, that it was determined that, what was his name? Muhammad Atta, one of the pilots. He was over here, not in the next county from where I am, is looking at some potential targets over there. We have the TVA has a lot of dams in the area. And so they were even contemplating hitting some of those things. So, they're everywhere. and they're seemingly anyhow. And just because it doesn't happen in New York or Washington doesn't mean they're not there waiting, probing, and sometimes attacking. So it's a dangerous time.
Yeah, and again, we back under Bush and even under Bush, we weren't really allowed to talk about it. I think political correctness kind of started there. We weren't able to say, hey, what's going on down there in Florida where people are being trained? Who are those people? Why are they here? It was kind of like, oh, they're just learning how to fly, and no big deal. And that's, I think that we still do that. We still minimize things because there are people with agendas that they want to see happen, and they're not going to want to stop that. So
I think I may have shared this on the program before, but seems apropos to bring it up again. In 1986, 30 something years ago, Ronald Reagan made an entry in his diary where, at the time, I think it was Bill Casey, the CIA director at the time, gave him an update on information that led them to believe that in 1986, Islamic operatives were coming across the southern border of the United States in 1986 and setting up cells at that point in time. That's 32 years ago.
right.
So they're there. They're out there. And it's only by the mercy of God that something like what happened 17 years ago today hasn't happened again. However, if we as a people don't learn the lesson, of 9/11, yeah, it's just a matter of time for something like that happens again.
Does the Bible talk about specific events that might happen, before the tribulation, but with people turning back? Is anything specific, or is it just that, in general, that if you turn your backs on God, then things will happen, that type of thing?
Well, does it get specific? Yeah, but I'm of the opinion that we don't really see it until it happens.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can kind of tell by what the Bible says that we're in a season and we need to be aware, we need to be alert, we need to be repentant. But to say specifically this is going to happen on such and such a day, I don't think it's there. We understand it after it happens. It's like Jonathan Cahn's teaching
Right.
about the towers, of 9/11. Now, as far as I know, nobody was saying this is what's going to happen, and it's going to happen on 9/11. It's going to happen to the Twin Towers.
Right.
Nobody was saying those kinds of things that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm.
But once it happens, then you can see things in Scripture that here it is. Here's God hinting at it right here, or He's speaking to Israel of old, and we are repeating those patterns. Now, that is something I am a firm believer in. And one of the things that I've shared with people is that, and this is found in Deuteronomy 31, that if we do turn our back on God, the terminology he uses in the text is, I will remove my presence from you. You turn away from me, I'll turn away from you. But what that really means is I'll remove my presence. And when he removes his presence, it's an open door for another presence to come in. But this time, he calls it a foe. It's an enemy. In fact, the Hebrew word is czar, which is kind of interesting to me, because in the wake of 9/11, we had all these czars, being assigned to different unelected positions that, have affected our lives. So that's what I see in general has been happening, is happening. The more we tell God we don't want you, the more he withdraws his presence and another presence comes in. And that's why we're in such danger as a nation today. That's why I've been telling people that if we feel that in 2016 we received a reprieve with the election of Donald Trump, and by that I mean Hillary didn't get into the White House, it's tied to the idea in the Bible that when an unclean spirit goes out of a house, it wanders through dry places seeking rest. It'll eventually come back to that person or that house. And if it finds the house is swept out and empty, that means the Holy Spirit is not there. What is good and righteous and virtuous is not there. It's just empty. Then that spirit goes and gets 7 spirits more wicked than he is, and they all move in together because he has no intention of getting kicked out again. So my point here is, if we did receive a reprieve, and I don't mind saying this, if that spirit that is embodied in Hillary Clinton and that mindset that she represents. If it was denied the White House, it's not going away.
No.
It's going to come back, and it's going to see if the people's house is void of the presence of God. And if it is, not she personally necessarily, but that spirit is intending to move back in, and it's going to bring other spirits that are more wicked than it is, so that they'll never be removed from it again. And if you look at what's going on politically, you see the violent attitude of the left and the progressives. If they get back in the White House, if they get back in the House and they take control, or they take control of the Senate, they have no intentions of getting rooted out again.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely not. And I wanted to. This is a segue into another topic that I wanted to talk about, because I think it's so closely related, and something that I'm truly, I believe in, and I'm getting more and more where I really believe this is true, and I want to get sort of everybody's opinion on what they think about this. You know, I think that there's a lot going on right now in the Middle East, and we're not hearing about it on mainstream media. And as we all know in here, and we've talked about before, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Israel, that's really the telltale signs of where we are on the, the timeline of the end times, and what God's message is to us, and the signs that we should be looking for. But we're not getting that information. And I'll talk about that in a second, what's going on. But just to start with, I'm really starting to believe in my heart, and getting more and more sure about it every day. I could be totally wrong, but I feel that Donald Trump was put in place by God for the peace agreement, the peace agreement that is signed for the tribulation. And I'll tell you kind of why I come to that. He is the first president, as we know, in the United States to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And he is also the first president that talked about moving the embassy to Israel and actually did it. And from what I have seen, with the Democrats, progressives, globalists, whatever you want to call them, and that's what I've been referring to them as, globalists and elitists. They want the New World Order, the one world government, the open borders. What dawned on me the other day, and it should have dawned on me before, I think. But I look at them as globalists and elitists, but what they truly are trying to do, while they're trying to stop Trump, it's even greater than that, in that they're trying to stop God's purpose and what God's will is. And I think that part of why Donald Trump was put into the presidency, and I do believe it was at the hand of God and the blessing of God, or he wouldn't be there, is that he may be that person, that president, who is going to be the one that brings that, peace agreement between Israel and Palestine that will eventually usher in the Antichrist. And this could all fall apart, but I think we are seeing it at this time. I really do. And I don't know if you want to make a comment before I continue, Bill. You can if you want.
I don't know. I mean, No. I mean, I'm not being flippant. I just don't know. I definitely see that one of Trump's main contributions to the last days and what God is doing and how God is orchestrating things is to bring attention back to Jerusalem by moving the embassy of the United States to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, acknowledging Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, which in itself ignited a powder keg. Just the announcement, and then of course opening the embassy. That's what happened on the Gazan border and all those things. And so, I would definitely go so far as to say that this is Bill's opinion anyway. His main contribution to God's end time purpose right now centers on Jerusalem. So that being said, I wouldn't be surprised if, after all of these other politicians and all their efforts to bring stability to the Middle East, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump is the guy that brings some kind of temporary stability to the Middle East, and that would in effect set the stage for the one we call Antichrist. So whether it happens, we'll have to wait and see.
We'll have to wait and see. Now, Linda says, I agree, Susan. Jonathan says, could be. And let me continue on a little bit more how I got here. And again, I think that the deeper part of it is that we see the deep state, what they call the deep state. They work 24/7. Unlike any other president, we all know that. This is something that we've never seen in the history of our lives, Bill, and I don't think anywhere along the way where it's 24/7. That's why I think this is more not about Donald Trump, not about America. It's about God. It is truly God's purpose that they are fighting against and trying to prevent from happening and taking place. Now,
well, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. Now, Donald Trump just recently, he cut $25 million from Palestine. This was money that was earmarked to be given to the hospitals in East Jerusalem to be used for the Palestinians. So if they had, let's say, cardiac surgery they needed, something they couldn't get someplace else, dialysis for children, something very important, that type of thing, then that would be where they would go to get this care, and it would be paid for out of this funding that we had, the $25 million. Now, you might remember back in August, he cut $200 million already. And the way I see it, and I'm sure a lot of people see it this way, he is trying to force the Palestinians to the negotiation table to enter into this peace agreement. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and the ambassador of Israel have been working on this peace agreement now for probably about a year, a little bit longer. Darlene says she's on the same wavelength with me there. So, and they have been working diligently. And it just so happens that this agreement that they have been working on, they have dubbed it the deal of the century. I think it may be more the deal of the lifetime, but and it's something that is going to be announced this month. When President Trump speaks before the UN, he is going to give us the details of this deal of the century.
When is that speech supposed to take place? Do you know?
September 18th to October 5th, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in there. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, let me share why I think that's interesting. Yesterday was the biblical name was Yom Teruah, or the Feast of Trumpets. Judaism refers to it as Rosh Hashanah. On God's calendar, Yom Teruah we're supposed to be blowing trumpets to awaken us to the times in which we live. And it is referred to as Yom Hadin, which is the day of judgment. God is judging things. God is deciding on things right now. And according to tradition, when we get to Yom Kippur, which is, Bill, my mind just went blank. I think a week from tomorrow. Darlene, you might can verify that for me since you're on here. But God seals those decisions that he makes on the day of judgment. And I'm just saying this is Jewish tradition, but there might be some merit to it. So, and then just 5 days after that begins Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, which is the Kingdom Feast. All of that is to say, we're in a very, very prophetic time on the Hebrew calendar. And so I'm always amazed at how these things have a tendency to take shape in and around these times on the Hebrew calendar.
And since the 19th.
It's the 19th. So that's the beginning of what? That's Yom Kippur, or that's that would be Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right. So, and just a few days after that, we get into Sukkot, and Sukkot runs for 8 days. So, if he does actually speak in that window, he's speaking during these high holy days. I think that's very interesting. Very interesting.
Now, the one thing that we know, if this is the agreement, then that's going to usher in the Antichrist, who's going to sit. Israel's going to believe that this is their Messiah, and they won't find out until 3.5 years after the Antichrist or this agreement, according to what I know of the Bible. That
Okay, according to what you know, you can see my face, I guess.
I know it feels like, oh, I'm not sure. But somewhere in there, the Antichrist is going to reign, and then it will be discovered that this is not the Messiah, that they have been tricked, and that this agreement they've made a deal with the devil. Do you want to change that or?
Well, I will just share my thoughts. First of all, if Trump and his team are trying to corral the Palestinians, to get them to the table, to try to make some kind of an agreement, Mr. Trump needs to be very, very careful about how he forces the Israelis in this situation, and how he interacts with the Israelis, because it's never worked out good for us. I don't care who the president is. It's never worked out good for us if we start messing with the boundaries that God has established for Jerusalem and for Israel. It always comes back on us. So I would hope that with the spiritual advisors that Mr. Trump seems to go to quite readily, I would hope that there's somebody in that group that's going to speak into his ear and say, don't force Israel into something that is untenable. Don't force them on the boundaries of Jerusalem or the status of Jerusalem. I'm hopeful that his decision to put the embassy there is kind of a statement on that. We'll see. But it's just a word of caution.
Right.
As far as the scenario, I have a little different view, and that is, it's not so much that Israel is deceived into believing somebody is the Messiah, as much as it is the guy that is going to be the Antichrist is just anti-Christ, not posing as Christ, but coming in the stead of Christ and opposing all those things that Christ would be for, namely what is represented by Jerusalem and Zion and the restoration of the kingdom of Israel. So now that's an opinion, a lot of people will be deceived.
Yeah.
But it won't just be Jews. The world is going to be.
The world will be deceived. And the way I look at it is that this agreement, in the beginning, like you said, you have to be careful. You can't divide Jerusalem. You can't divide Israel with this agreement. And so Donald Trump better be careful. Amir Sarfati, which beholdisrael.org, he is of the belief that Donald Trump knows Israel, knows that he shouldn't be doing that, and won't do that. And he's never felt that about any other president. He feels that strongly about this president, and feels that Netanyahu believes that about this president. And so I'm thinking that somewhere along the line, this agreement, there's a possibility that this agreement could very well benefit Israel right now, and could somehow change before it's, whether it's Donald Trump doesn't get reelected and the agreement changes somehow and somebody else has it signed. We don't know. But I think he's putting it into play. And eventually this agreement will be broken and will not benefit Israel.
Well, that I agree with 110%. In fact, what I would look for in any quote unquote peace deal is not so much, a Palestinian state, not even borders where, this Palestinian state would be, but what's the final decision made about the Temple Mount? And would this peace agreement give access to the Temple Mount by those on the Israeli side who want to see a temple rebuilt? Because, see, I think the Bible teaches, and again, this is my opinion, this is based on what I've studied, and this is a conclusion I've come to, and I may be dead wrong. But it seems to me that what happens, that what really exposes who the Antichrist is when Israelis are up on the Temple Mount, and there are efforts to build a temple, and that's ongoing. See, I personally believe that that's what is happening. That's the contract that is broken, and the guy who's the Antichrist comes in to put a stop to that, and that's when the two witnesses are killed. Now, again, that's my opinion, but what I'm saying is I agree with you that we may have the workings of an agreement that maybe Trump has every inclination to benefit Israel. We're going to have to deal with the Palestinians. We're going to have to force them to the table, but we're going to try to make it where Israel benefits from this. And that treaty, agreement, whatever you want to call it, is what ends up getting broken. That I can see.
Well, and one of the things that is happening right now, I think we're getting to the point where that third temple has to be built in order, from what I understand, where the Antichrist will reign. And last week, according to the Temple Institute, a red heifer was born without spot or blemish, and it has been certified as a blemishless heifer. And the ashes of that heifer, or this heifer or some other heifer in the future. But this is the first one, my understanding, that has ever been a perfect red heifer. The ashes have to be sacrificed before that third temple, or taken to the third temple. So you have another.
Oh, no. We're treading deep water now. Okay. No, I mean, in the Bible, and this is in the book of Numbers chapter 19.
Yep.
Everything that pertains to the sanctuary has to be purified. It has to be sanctified, and because it comes in contact with temporal beings, human beings, fallen beings, it gets polluted. It becomes tainted. And so they would have to sanctify things with waters of purification. And the waters of purification involve the burning of a red heifer and its ashes being mixed with this water. And then everything that has these waters of purification that is going to be deemed holy has to be sprinkled. So the idea here is that the Temple Mount itself has been polluted. There's the Dome of the Rock. There's the Mosque of Omar, the Golden Dome there. It has been polluted. It's been contaminated. It's been rendered unclean. And so before any structure could be placed up there that is related to the sanctuary, the entire Temple Mount has to be sprinkled with waters of purification. But for that to happen, you have to have the ashes of a red heifer. Well, they haven't had the ashes of a red heifer since the second temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago. So, they've been on the lookout, for a pure red heifer. Now, a word of warning, we've been down this road before. About 20 years ago, there was a red heifer that was born. They named it Melody, and they watched it, because it's got to be a certain age. But then it produced a couple of white hairs, and it was disqualified. Right. So that has happened before. This one, we will see. We will see. But I tell you what, I will make this prediction. If they burn a red heifer, all heck's getting ready to break loose.
Yeah. Well, and the Paula and Marlene were both talking about, it could develop blemishes and color and all like that. I think the difference here, and I may be wrong, but I heard that this is the first time that one has been certified, that they went so far as to certify this one as one without blemish. I don't think the ones in the past, they kind of watched it, but it wasn't certified. So I could be wrong, but that's what I've heard from other people as well, that this is the one that they claim is.
What I read was that and Chaim Rickman, who is associated with the Temple Institute, what I understood is that they have a candidate. Mm-hmm. They have a potential candidate here. And as this gets a little older, when it's of age, then, they'll make the final determination. That is my understanding of the matter. But nonetheless, it is something for us all to keep our eyes and ears open to, because I know that in Judaism, those who are wanting the rebuilding of a temple and who've been pushing for this for a long time, the reason there's a Temple Institute is because it's people who want to see a temple rebuilt. Mm-hmm. They believe that the reunification of Jerusalem was a sign from heaven that was a stepping stone toward building the sanctuary. I don't know when we talked about this, but do you remember me bringing up the fact that Truman and Trump have those common letters, and when you translate or transliterate those common letters into Hebrew, it's a word that is related to the contributions or the things that people would bring so that the sanctuary could be built. And so those people who are wanting to see the temple rebuilt, I believe, are very enthusiastic about Trump's involvement in the goings on, about the moving of the embassy, because they see that not as the act of a person, but a person who is being influenced by the Creator. And that to them translates in the time is getting nearer for us to build the temple. So all these things are kind of, they've been stewing, they've been marinating, and now you get this idea that they may be coming to that place where all these things start to happen. But again, if they burn red heifer, get ready. I mean, because all heck's going to break loose.
Yeah, Marlene said it's God's doing or man's doing.
What are we talking about now?
Well, just bringing about this whole thing, because you're saying the Jews want to rebuild that temple.
Well, okay, I'm probably going to anger some people here. I think it's man wanting to reinstitute something, but if we go back into the sanctuary that God told Moses to build, and we go back to the temple that Solomon dedicated, here was the sign that God approved of it. His presence was in it. When Moses erected the tabernacle, the presence of God filled the tabernacle. Moses dared not enter. When Solomon dedicated the temple in Jerusalem, it said that the presence of God came down and dwelt in the most holy place, and the priests could not stand to minister. So men will build temples. They had a sanctuary right up until the time Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it, but that doesn't mean God was there. They had a temple right up until the Romans destroyed it, but that doesn't mean God was there. And so just because the Bible describes another temple in the book of Revelation chapter 11 doesn't mean necessarily that God is in it. It might just mean that men are trying to do these things. But going back to the idea that this may be setting the stage for the Antichrist, and I'm probably getting too long-winded here, but even if it's men trying to rebuild this, I believe that is the provocation for this man that we know as Antichrist to come in and put a stop to it. I believe that's when the two witnesses are killed, and that's when he goes in and he desecrates, not necessarily to rule and reign from that temple, but to go in and to pollute it, to desecrate it. And frankly, that's why I believe he's a Muslim.
Now, Chesney wanted to know was this heifer genetically modified in any way?
That I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. From what I understood, and maybe you can explain this a little bit if you know, I read somewhere that they weren't allowed to bring in a red heifer. So they had to, give birth to a red heifer inside of Israel, that it had to be, they weren't allowed to import it,
Well, many years ago, 25 years ago now, maybe longer, there was a gentleman, I used to know his name, but his name has escaped me now. He was a rancher in Mississippi who was a believer, and he got to reading Numbers 19 and come to understand the need for a red heifer. So he went to Israel and he worked with ranchers in Israel how to breed, Angus cattle, with the idea of trying to breed a red Angus cow. I'm going to assume that they already have things in place in Israel now, that they don't need to bring it from outside, right. That they can do it right there. But I also understand that our pure red Angus cow is a rarity indeed. and so to have one, it's got to be the hand of God. That's how I see it anyway.
Now, Jonathan was saying that he thought it was 3 years old when it was of age. So I don't know if that's what he was. Chesney had asked, when is it at age? He said 3 years old. I mean, is that, I don't know. Again, I'm a little confused with why they would certify this heifer now, if it could change, if they thought it could change after the certification. If indeed, I heard a pastor say that, so I'm assuming hopefully he got that right. But that's what I heard from the pastor, that it was certified. So I'm anxious. I'm going to look into that more, because I would like to know how quickly it changes, if anything.
Well, I only say that because we've been down this road before, where we've had a red cow. It even made the cover of Newsweek magazine back in the day. Mm-hmm. So now, as far as the age, I'm just looking at the text here. Because I don't remember it actually giving it's an age. No, it just says that it has to be a heifer,
right?
And it gives stipulations there. But now in rabbinical tradition or oral tradition. They have these ideas and criteria for different things that supposedly were handed down, hand to mouth. That didn't come out right. Mouth to mouth or mouth to ear, handed down by oral tradition. I'll get it out here in just a minute. I'm sorry. I'm still back on something else. So I don't know. I'll have to look into that.
Now, Alan said, how can he desecrate a place not sanctified? Just a lingering question that he has.
Well, if they have a temple standing, then they have sanctified the spot. Mm-hmm. And all of these different things that are being done in accordance with oral tradition, in accordance with what Moses wrote, all of it's going to have to be sanctified with waters of purification. Here's a scenario, something I've contemplated.
We lost Bill.
But
there you are. Are you back? Great.
Yeah, I know. I was like, what happened? What about the possibility that this happens? He comes in and desecrates it on the day that it's being dedicated. And I don't think that's too far-fetched. Many years ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Asher Kaufman who did studies on the Temple Mount, the location of the temple. And according to him, if you follow oral tradition and the customs that have been handed down, things that are written in the scripture, that from start to finish, it would take approximately 3.5 years to build the temple. So what about the possibility that on the day it's being dedicated, that's when the anti-Messiah comes in and kills the 2 witnesses? He comes in and he defiles the temple. Now, I'm not saying that's what God told me. I'm just telling you that's a scenario, something to consider, because I've contemplated all of these questions that are coming up, But, back to Trump and his contribution to this. I wouldn't be surprised if we aren't looking at a scenario that would lead to something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also think that everything is sort of set up to have this happen as well. We have, Russia, Iran, and Turkey all sitting there, all of them with financial difficulties that could bring about Ezekiel 38 and 39. How much longer are all of these people sort of going to be in place before something happens to Israel? Fred said there is no temple. So before all of this happens, but are we going to see these people go away and then come back 20 years from now? Because 8 years ago or so, these people weren't even there. They weren't in place. And now they're trying to get an even more of a stronghold in Syria. We've got Idlib that's going on, where they're killing the last remaining rebels in Idlib in Syria. People are fleeing the country, going to Turkey. Everything is kind of like unfolding and happening, and the Middle East is on fire. I mean, this would be like an opportune time, I guess, for things to happen like this.
Well, that's why I keep saying, we're going to have to wait and see, because all of these things, we're not the first generation of seeing things going on and taking shape and thinking that, this might be it. I mean, back, in the days of World War II, there were people who were convinced that Adolf Hitler was the Antichrist and Mussolini was the false prophet, Obviously, he was an Antichrist, but he wasn't the Antichrist, right? So I just always take the cautionary position of, these things look like they could head this way, but we're going to have to wait and see. And here's one of the reasons I say that. There are things that will happen. I want to make sure I say this carefully. There are things that will happen, and then there are those things that happen but didn't have to. And it seems to hinge on how we respond to God's wooing and his calling. In other words, when Jerusalem was destroyed after the Messiah walked the earth 40 years after he was here, if you read the scripture very carefully, you will see that came as a consequence of their not realizing the time of their visitation, because they didn't realize God was visiting them. He was wanting to gather them. Therefore, as a consequence, they were scattered. When Israel was standing at the threshold of going into the land of Canaan, 2 years into their journey, 2 years, because they didn't believe God and wouldn't go in. That's why they had to wander another 38 years. So as things take shape, and it looks like at any minute something's going to happen to ignite this, and all the things written in the prophets and all the things written in the book of Revelation are about to unfold, I always think that it can all be delayed.
Absolutely.
If that's the right word.
Mm-hmm.
Based on how we respond to his wooing. If people are turning to him and returning to him, I think it is possible that some of these things are stayed. And then if we don't, we see these things begin to accumulate, to grow more intense, have things happening more frequently. And at a certain point, it reaches the tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's going to happen is going to happen. Now, that's my view on it.
Don said, Bill, won't we be out of here before the temple is even built? And I believe that depends upon when you think the rapture is going to occur.
Well, that depends on who you talk to, Don.
Yeah. If you're talking to me, because I believe in pre-trib rapture, I believe that we will be out of here. We will never know who the Antichrist is. The church will be gone. But other people who are mid-trib, post-trib, and there's even a period in between mid and post, I forget the name of that trib, but people there, would think that you're still here and that you're going through the whole tribulation period.
Well, this is one of those things that Susan and I don't quite see eye to eye on. But my thoughts are, I hope you're right, Susan. If you're right,
I did too, Bill.
if you're right, I'm good with it. I'm really good with it. I'm not counting on it, but I'm good with it. All right?
Yeah, that's true. And now Jonathan said Genesis 15:9. I'm not sure what that reference is exactly, and said this has been a great God's views on political news. I love the Word of God, absolutely. And I think that the way what I try to remember is, yes, Bill, you're absolutely correct. Things could change. We could go back to square one. Tomorrow Russia and everybody else could decide to leave. And we would be in a different scenario. It can happen at any time. But I also do think, and I try to keep this in mind, that God said, you will see the signs when these things begin to happen. Look up, your redemption draws near. And I think we are seeing a lot of signs, and also to the fact that God said that those people, will come like a thief in the night. My understanding of that is that means to people who don't know Christ, they'll be fooled and they won't know when God is coming. And so it'll be like a thief in the night. But those who are believers will know that these, God is showing us signs. And then it's,
Well, obviously, with all the comments coming up here, we're probably going to have to do a program as to why you believe what you believe and I believe a little differently than that. But by the way, Jonathan's reference in Genesis 15 was the fact that Abraham sacrificed a 3-year-old heifer. Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we have to remember, whether you're pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, or whatever trib you are, it doesn't really matter, because what's important is that we are Christians, that we all believe in the Bible and God's word. And if we're, out of here before it all happens, great. If we're here during the middle part of it, that's not so great. If we're here at the end, that's not so great. But I don't know that it really matters. And I don't want that to be a division between Christians when they.
No, it should not. And that's why I have never, been caustic, and derogatory to those who have a pre-trib position, and I feel otherwise, but I don't think that the timing of something needs to be a pillar of our faith walk. We have opinions. Now, when we allow those things to become a pillar, and we allow it to divide, then that's an issue. And so we're not going to let that be an issue here.
Yeah. No, because we have enough division in this world already. We don't need to.
That's right. It'll all pan out in the end, Paula says. So she's planning trip.
And that's good. I mean, the thing that really matters is that we will be with God when the time comes that we're supposed to be with God, and that'll be great. So.
Well, if we've got our eyes on Him, because that's what He tells us to do. Look up, lift up your head. The idea is to have our eyes on Him. Right. Then if I have my eyes on Him, what's going on around me won't matter as much. So
No, exactly. So, wow, I tell you, this has been I know. I love Marlene. Agreed, Susan. Agreed, Bill. So I love Marlene because she doesn't. There's no division with Marlene. It's just like
Yeah.
okay, whatever. So this is good. I want to thank everybody for being here today. Thank you so much for your comments and your questions. They've really added to the show, and we really appreciate that. For everybody, again, we should always remember 9/11, what it stood for, what it means for America and for the world. And also, let's pray for everyone who's in that path of Hurricane Florence, that they get out of the way, that everybody is safe, including the animals that are involved, and anybody who's still trying, excuse me, to stay there. If you're told to evacuate, please evacuate. Don't take chances on something like that.
No.
But yeah, it's not worth it. So
Nope.
again, God bless you. We'll see you again next week. Take care.
Take care.